Good morning and happy Friday. It is so good to get to see everybody today. I know it has been several weeks since we last gathered. I hope everyone is enjoying their summer. We have a super exciting interview coming up this morning with Nicole Clagett. She's the Director of Community Development and Caregiver Support for Duke Home Care and Hospice. She's also an ABC News contributor. So a few quick announcements before we begin. Let these people in. Okay. Please make sure to write your name and organization in the comment box and post any questions that you have along the way. Also, make sure to mark your calendars. Our next monthly coalition meeting is scheduled for Friday, August 19th from 11 to 1 p.m. So we're super excited to gather back together. There's been a lot going on. And then last but not least, the progress report. As many of you have heard and seen, our progress report is finalized and is available on the website. A very big thank you to Steve Hahn. He has drafted a press release for all of our members to share within their organizations and communities. So be on the lookout for that as we'll be sharing it soon. And with that, Heather, we'll go ahead and get started. We're super excited.
Well, thank you and welcome to the North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition members. As Virginia said, we have my good friend Nicole Clagett on, and Virginia, you did two of her titles. I never know which title to use, so let's see. Yes, we have Director of Community Development and Caregiver Support for Duke Home Care and Hospice. She's a contributor for ABC 11's Caregiver Corner, and she's also host and co-founder of Edge of Aging. And so we're going to get into her ridiculous amount of fantastic roles. We were talking right beforehand. We've been good friends since November of 2008, and so I have watched her amazing journey as such a great advocate and caregiver and friend and professional. So Nicole, welcome. You have such a rich personal and professional path. I know all of it's going to resonate with our coalition, especially focusing on serious illness and caregiving. So take it away. Share a little with us about your background first. Where did you grow up? What were the experiences that helped to shape you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So nice to meet all of you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Really appreciate you taking some time in the middle of summer to just chat with me a little bit, and really excited just to kind of share some of the journey and some of the work that we're doing these days and how we could potentially even all work together. So a little bit about me. So I'm a social worker by trade. So I'm a graduate of Siena College, and I got my degree in social work. And a brief little story about me is that my goal in my life when I was 21 years old and knew everything that I was going to be when I grew up was that I was going to be a guidance counselor, and I was going to work with kids, and I was super excited about it. And I will say, fast forward, now that I have 3 of my own, I'm glad I'm not a guidance counselor, and I'm glad I don't work with kids. But in my senior year in college, I by accident got placed, instead of in a school, in a senior living facility, nursing home, and I got to work with older adults. And the quick little story I share about that experience is that on my very first day in the nursing home, when I was quite a little bit, I think the word these days is salty about the fact I wasn't working with kids and I was working with the total opposite spectrum. They brought me down to one of the units, and they introduced me to a lady by the name of Betty. And Betty said to me, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long. Where have you been?" And she was for sure thought I was her niece. And I was being the very helpful social worker that I was. And I said, "Oh, no. I'm Nicole. I'm a social worker student. I'm here to help you." And she really got angry with me. Of course, she had Alzheimer's disease, and I had no idea what I was doing. And the director of social worker said, "She is your first client." And I thought to myself, I have to work 20 hours a week for an entire school year in this advanced standing social work program in this nursing home, and I am going to be absolutely miserable. Fast forward, I absolutely fell in love with Betty. I learned a lot about Alzheimer's disease. I learned a lot about older adults. I graduated college. It completely changed my course. I ended up working my very first job in a memory care unit as an activities director. And then I received a phone call back about 6 months after I got my first job to say, "Would you be our social worker on the memory care unit?" And I said, yes. And my very first day on the job, Betty came up to me and she said, hey, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. And again, I was her niece, but this time I knew what to do. And Betty was the very first lady whose hand I held as she passed away, and her family accepted me as her niece. It was just a really beautiful experience. And so kind of as I've gone through the course of my career, when I'm not necessarily working directly with patients or residents or clients, participants, whatever you call them in your world, I always remember Betty and how much she touched my heart and kind of the reason why I do what I do. So that's a little bit about how I got into the field.
That's a beautiful story. And it's amazing how it resonates with, I know my experience as a teenager, that these experiences that we have that are so foundational that we didn't even realize that we needed, we need to have that experience with older adults, or people don't realize what a wonderful pathway that can be, which, well, now I'm trying to decide which direction to go on, but then continue on, because I know that there were other things that helped shape your pathway in terms of then when you left that position, where were the positions you went to next?
Yeah. So I was, I actually was so blessed. I've always been really blessed with having supervisors or bosses, whatever you want to call them. They always gave me a chance. So here I was, like a 22-year-old person as a brand new social worker in a long-term care community. And they decided to give me a chance, and they decided to send me around the country. So back then, it was like 1998. There really weren't special care memory units or anything like that. That was sort of something that people were starting to talk about in some of the more innovative areas of the country, but they didn't really exist. So they actually charged me with creating the very first memory care unit in upstate New York. And so they sent me around to a few places in the country that were actually creating those and building those. And I got to tour them, and then I got to come back and, as scared as I was at 22 years old, gave a presentation to the board of directors of that nonprofit and said, this is what I saw. This is what I want to do. And they let me build it. And we created it. And so we had our very first memory care unit I helped to manage that. They really elevated the role of a social worker in that role, which was really interesting. I started making rounds with the medical director, with the RN, kind of talking about what we were seeing psychosocially. We started, actually giving people doses of Tylenol when they were acting out versus going to antipsychotics, because we were starting to realize when people are acting out with dementia, it could be pain, so this was way back when, there were still restraints being used. We got rid of restraints. So all those different pieces. And then eventually from there, I moved into the world of adult daycare. And I ended up managing 5 adult daycare centers for this nonprofit in upstate New York. And my career kind of went in that direction. And then I ended up having my first child and decided to take a little time off of work. And then lo and behold, I ended up becoming a caregiver for my grandfather. So then I took all of this knowledge that I had, that I worked in the field for, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years at the time. And then suddenly I had to apply that to a personal journey. And I was a caregiver for my grandfather when I had a 2-year-old, a 2-week-old, and a puppy. And I don't know which of all those things was the most that I was dealing with at the same time, but ended up walking along with that journey with my grandfather in my home until he eventually passed away, and really had some very interesting experiences, even with, he had very well written out advanced directives, and I had to call the hospital to send him to the hospital because he had pneumonia. And there's even stories about how the primary care physician didn't listen when I said he's sick, and I brought him back 3 times. And it ended up, he woke up with delirium and started chewing on his hearing aid, and he was completely cognitively intact. So I knew he was really sick, but he had a DNR, and I gave the ambulance director, for example, a full report on what he wanted, what he didn't want, slapped his advanced directives on his chest, had to nurse the baby before I went to the hospital, got to the hospital, he was fully intubated, the whole 9 yards. And so, that was a very interesting experience as well. So then went from that to moving to North Carolina, where I worked in a very different role for me. And it was really hard to wrap my head around it. So I had always either been a social worker working directly with patients, or a social worker managing, operations and still touching patients, to a role that was completely and strictly marketing. And it was really hard for me as marketing in a home care setting, private duty home care. How am I going to use my skills, and how am I going to feel filled up in this type of a role? So I decided that I needed to start to look at my role in private duty home care and marketing as more of a macro approach, and looking at how do we bring organizations and systems together. And on that very first day is when I met Heather.
I know. Yeah, it has been amazing. And I do want to take a moment, because I'm looking at the holiday squares, and just sort of respect, honor, thank you for the work that a number of us have traveled the professional focus, and then all of a sudden having to turn that skill set personally as caregivers. And so we know what that's like to have to go. And then you're also speaking to the focus of one of our work groups at the coalition, looking at advanced care planning and people having advanced directives, and are they being honored? And so there are so many things that we're going to continue to touch on. We're not going to have the time during this talk, but already we're finding ways with your vast experience to work together. But yes, you and I met at a Care Transitions Community Forum, and I remember it was your first day, and you stood up and you're like, this is what I think we can do as a statewide coalition. And somehow you, in an amazing way, in a beautiful way, said, I'm willing to do this. And it really got the rest of the participants. I think there was like 100 people there. Well, here's this person who just came to North Carolina, and she's willing to volunteer her efforts. Well, we should too. So continue on. So then, because I know a lot built from that, what you did and how you transformed that role in home care and how you saw yourself. So what happened from there?
So from there, obviously primary role marketing, building a business for a home care agency in the area, and building a territory for them in an area that they were not, working in. And I always laugh, and I always tease the owner of this agency that's still in existence. But he said to me when he first met me, he was really hesitant to hire me, because he said, I'm not so sure a Yankee is going to be able to to work with everybody here in the South. And he goes, I don't think people are going to be able to build a relationship with you. And I was like, but I'm a social worker. I know how to listen. And so it's just kind of funny how even when you come from different regions and territories, people are not really sure how you're going to come across working in a different area. So, but in any event, so that worked out, really, really well. I was able to, work on building relationships. I was able to serve on coalitions with Heather and other groups. I was able to do support groups for family caregivers. I had a really odd experience. We had an open house one day, and the owner of WCHL happened to be at an open house, and I was feeling really passionate about aging issues. And I just walked up to him and I said, the media needs to be paying more attention to older adult issues, and you need to have some sort of a radio show about older adult issues and how to connect people to resources. And we need to elevate the base knowledge of the lay community. And he just kind of looked at me, probably thought I was literally like, what is this woman? It's like she just randomly walks up to me. And then about a week later, he called me up and he said, can you come into our office? And I said, sure. He goes, I was listening to your idea. It sounded like a great idea. Talk to me more about what you're thinking. I did. And he said, okay, we would like you to host that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like scariest moment ever. Like how I've never even been on the radio. I've never done anything with media, really outside of my comfort zone. But then I ended up running a radio show for WCHL for 6 or 7 years called Caring Connections, and did that along with my work. And then in the middle of all of that, I really just felt pulled towards the caregiver, and just always remembered the thread of the family member in every role that I had throughout my entire career. The focus has always been, and as it should be, the patient, the client, the participant, the resident, and all my different sort of roles. We called that person something different. but there was always this family sort of in the background. And I always felt, you wanted to spend time with that family, but you could never really spend as much time with that family as you really wanted to. And they always sort of looked like they were going through some whiplash of, they're always having to tell their story over and over again. And my heart always pulled towards that individual. And so I met a lady, her name is Julie Faulkner, and we just started talking about, what could we do for family caregivers? And it ended up that we ended up founding a charity in our area called Guiding Light's Caregiver Support Center. And so we built that literally from the ground up. We were able to get amazingly community support for a nonprofit that didn't even have a 501c3 yet. Organizations were giving money without even the possibility of them writing it off. Actually, Heather was one of our founding board members. We were able to build it from the ground up, and we ran this charity for 11 years. And it was just an amazing opportunity to really build and place that caregiver out in front. And back when we started that entity, caregiving really wasn't on the radar anywhere. And it was in a lot of ways before its time. And so we were trying to really build up a lot of noise around caregiver support and what we need to do for family caregivers. And I'll stop there for a second, Heather.
No, that was amazing. There's like two different directions I want to go on. Will, you talked about your motivation for starting Guiding Lights, and yes, I was able to watch that journey for so many years, and it just provided thousands and thousands of people with services and support. And I love your term, I want to create a lot of noise. I haven't heard you say that before, and I wanted to let's link it back with your starting your entrance into broadcasting. So more than anyone, you have this knack for creating, in a good way, this great noise. So you got the radio show. I know, because I just saw them on my bookshelf. You created a ton of educational videos through Caring Matters. You have other radio shows you hosted. ABC News came on board, and now you're a TV personality with them. So, and you have the podcast. What inspires you to continue to be comfortable and growing in the broadcasting medium to create this noise, this outreach about caregiving? What have you learned about that?
Well, what I learned is, and I think it's interesting because it takes a really long time to build that, right? Like all of us in our careers, you feel like you're pushing a rock up a gigantic mountain. And then all of a sudden you get to the top, and then it tips over, and then it starts really going down fast. And then when it's going down really fast, everyone's like, wow, how did that happen? Boy, that must have been a stroke of luck. Well, what people don't really see is all that it took to push that rock up the hill. And so it was, while the WCHL thing was really cool, and that really was sort of like, I did approach the person, but it ended up being, I think, in my opinion, a stroke of luck that happened. But everything else that I've done in broadcast has really taken a lot of elbow grease and constant persistence to get some of those bigger players like WPTF. That was an interesting story, how that one ever happened. But and ABC 11 especially, to turn their heads towards caregiver support and aging related issues, because again, it's really not, for lack of a better term, but this is a term they use in media, it's really not like sexy news. Like, they would rather cover, and I'm not saying these are not good topics. Well, obviously right now everything's all about COVID, but prior to all this ruckus, they'd rather cover things about children or animals or the environment. But our older adults have always been sort of this throwaway society. And I always try to say it's our older adults that built our country, and how dare we not give them that attention and support that they need, in their older years, and how dare we not support those who are going to be supporting them. And so, it really took a lot of, literally every month I would pepper them with emails and say, it sent them my pitch again. Here you go. This is what I want to do. This is why I want to do it. These are the new statistics. And then finally, I ended up getting, finally, they would agree to like bring me on like once every 6 months or whatever, because I think I was just being super annoying. And then finally, I met with some of the people who make decisions, and I was being super passionate, because I am passionate about the work. And then they said, okay, we'll give it a go. And then they found it to be, the word that they call is sticky in media. So they ended up having a lot of, they were surprised by the amount that people were responding, especially when they started bringing me on live and we were doing live questions and answers, and how many people, like when they would go like Facebook Live, they would have like 5,000 people or 10,000 people staying on and watching me for 15 straight minutes, which was a lot of minutes for me. Like people usually click onto something and click off. And so then they were like, oh, okay. And then they wanted more. And then that got to be overwhelming, but yeah. So it's really, in my opinion, it's a multiple prong approach, right? It's great organizations like the organizations that you all represent in doing the work that we do. And it's, but we also have to have a marketing component to all of what we do. And what does that mean? That doesn't sound very nice to say we have to market older adult related things, but we kind of do. And to me, it's like when you are driving down the road, I always think about this, and I'm not an endorser of Safe Light Auto Repair, but I always think about this because it happened to me. I'm driving down the road, you're constantly hearing, Safe Light Auto. If you get a crack in your windshield and you hear the jingle in your head, I get a crack in my windshield. And who do I think of? I think of Safe Light Auto, right? It's because it's not that I would think of them on any other day. So similarly, I feel like, if we're talking about adult daycare centers, in my opinion, one of the best kept secrets in healthcare, or, why you need an advanced directive or hospice care, you may not need it today, but you have heard something about it. And so it doesn't seem quite so foreign when the hospital caseworker comes to you and says, hey, mom needs rehab. Mom, we think mom is at end of life. Mom needs palliative care. And then it's not quite as overwhelming. It's still overwhelming, but it's not quite as overwhelming. So if we can do what we can to build up that knowledge and create that noise and make it seem normal, I think that we're doing our community a great service.
Oh, and as the chats are starting to come in, as our colleague Sue says, you're exactly right. We need to continue to make noise about the needs of caregivers. And again, I love your term stickiness. I feel like I've been stuck with you in a wonderful way. I've been watching you since 2008 because you're just doing so many interesting things. And I think just weaving that together, you keep knowing what the community needs. You created Guiding Lights because you knew caregivers needed more focus. You then have been using the media in different ways in order to get that. What a great analogy with now we should bring them on. We don't have sponsors. We'll bring them on as sponsor. So now what's next? I know you're over at Duke. I know there's some exciting initiatives going on. How are you taking this sort of collective energy and experience and knowledge base? Who's getting a lot of your attention and energy now?
Yeah, so part of the big challenge I had with Guiding Lights. So Guiding Lights, back in 2001, and I will say it was not easy to keep Guiding Lights afloat. And Heather,
I know,
it is very hard to keep a small grassroots nonprofit afloat that has absolutely no funding streams, no payer sources, and even the funders are like, caregiver support. I'm not so sure I really want to provide funding to that. So it was a lot. And so one of the ways we were trying to keep that entity going was trying to create a national replication. How do we teach? How do we get other organizations across the country to view the importance of the role of the caregiver and the need for caregiver support? And the problem I had when I was going around the country, speaking at conferences, having one-on-one meetings, is that everybody wanted Guiding Lights to run it for them. They were kind of scared of caregivers. They didn't understand caregivers. They didn't understand how to engage with caregivers. They didn't understand how to get caregivers to attend conferences like we were able to and things of that nature. And so we kept running into that. So what ended up happening was the Duke University Health System looked at our model of care. We ended up doing a great, like, little mini study, not an official study. We'll call it a pilot, let's just say, because I don't want to get you ever think we did like an official RB study, but we looked at basically a group of people who received caregiver support services through Guiding Lights, through a Medicare managed care plan, and the group of people that didn't. And we kind of said, we looked to see, did it make a difference, even in hospital readmissions, things of that nature? And my God, did it make a huge difference. And so once I had a little bit of data, the Duke University Health System said, wow, this sounds really interesting. And so ended up being that I got recruited away from Guiding Lights Caregiver Support Center to build a caregiver support program within the Duke University Health System. And so basically have rebuilt that program from the ground up, but with the idea of being able to be in a health system to support the patients across Duke Health and in the community. So while it sits in Duke Home Care and Hospice, that's really just the place where it sits. Its intention is to support caregivers and patients across the health system and beyond. And so it's been really interesting and fun to be able to launch that. The program actually launched in February of this year. But the other piece that the health system is really interested in and supports me in is to actually teach other health systems across the United States about why caregiver support is important, why we need to be investing in this as health systems, and how it makes a difference. So we're in the period of time now where we're slowly ramping up the program, starting to gather data, and then we're doing some really great and fun things for the community as well.
Oh, this is so exciting. Okay, there are so many ways that we can continue to work together as a coalition. I know we only have a few minutes left. I put it out there if others want to ask questions. I have a few, but given we have just a few minutes left, and I know you have some exciting initiatives coming up, and let's think about ways that the coalition can help, because I think there's such a connection in goals and missions. I think there's a few events coming up that you wanted the coalition to know about and potentially help with.
Yes, please. So we are running the two things this year, 2 Duke Caregiver Community Events. One is on September 20th, and I will get all the information over to Virginia, and that is a national virtual event, and it's free to anybody across the United States. So an example of how are we pushing caregiver support across the country. And it is a fully bilingual event. So all of our educational sessions are simultaneously translated verbally into Spanish, which is really fantastic. It's a really super fun platform. And we're really excited. We actually have Robin Roberts as our spokesperson for the event. So really getting a lot of national support for this event. We think it's going to make a difference in our country. The other event, and some of you may have heard of the previous Caregiver Summits, which are no longer going to be operated, and I used to help coordinate those events for our community. Duke has created the Duke Caregiver Community Event, which is going to take place on October 28th at the Sheraton Imperial in person, willing that we don't have a horrible new variant of COVID, of course. But we are going to be offering 6 concurrent educational sessions. We're going to have an entire track for just professionals. There we are bringing in a lot of national speakers and a lot of really cool experience for attendees. And we're also going to be holding an evening networking session the night before as well. That event is not free. There's a nominal fee for family caregivers, just because I've learned over the years, if we don't charge something small, the no-show rate is huge. But if money is an issue, we will waive it and give a sort of like a promo code to let people in. So I don't want that to be a barrier. That will also be simultaneously translated in Spanish. So if somebody comes in attendance and they are not a primary English speaking individual, they will be given an earpiece, and the translators will go with them into sessions and translate, kind of like what you see at the UN when everybody's wearing the earpieces and all the languages are spoken to them. Super excited.
Oh, I too am so excited about these. I have watched for years. Your educational conferences are always wonderful. So I think that's great. We will make sure there's information out. So my colleague Sue had a similar question as I did. So just to wrap us up, what are the top things, she said, what are 2 things you would prioritize for caregivers in North Carolina? I was going to say magic wand. If you had a magic wand, or priorities about what you think would be helpful for our caregivers here.
So the big thing is, and it's something that we would try to do at the Caregiver Support Program, is provide access that is customized to them. I think one of the biggest disservices that we do in healthcare, because we're trying to give all this choice in the world, is giving people these lists, right? And so, small example, I know we have to go in a second here, but let's say I moved to North Carolina yesterday and I broke off my front tooth the day before I had to give this presentation to you all. And I'm thinking to myself, I do not want to sit in front of these people with a missing front tooth. So I say to Heather, hey, who's your dentist? Who would you recommend? I have got to get something done before tomorrow's presentation. And she'll say, I'm not really comfortable giving you a choice. Why don't you Google dentists? So I get a list of 1,000 dentists. That's basically what we do to family caregivers. That's not what they want. They want to know, if this was the scenario for your loved one, who would you use? And so I really feel like we need to really think about what's the best match for a family caregiver and really help guide them based off of what their needs are. So that is like number 1 for me. And I think providing access to caregivers for information, education, and support. I feel like caregivers feel like they're alone, and it is very isolating. I did it myself. And when I looked in the mirror after 6 months of caregiving for my grandfather, I didn't even recognize the person that I saw, but really trying to normalize asking for help and to teach people how to provide help and support for family caregivers is super important.
Oh, Nicole, this was so wonderful. And we have a whole work group looking at caregiver and patient engagement. I see the committee leads are looking and nodding. And so there are so many ways that our our coalition can continue to work with you. I can't thank you enough. There's so much more to talk about. We may need a part 2 with Nicole, but let's continue an ongoing relationship with all the work that you're doing. You're getting thank you from the participants, but Nicole Clagett, you'll see her on ABC, you'll see her at Duke on a podcast, and I think on behalf of all of us, I know I'm so impressed, I'm jealous, you make the best noise, continue to make the best noise, and we will join you, and so we'll be a crowd of supporters as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all for what you do. I hope you all have a great rest of the summer and stay well, okay? We'll be in touch. Bye-bye.